Hey everybody, welcome back to Off the Grid Tiny House. We're on day 12 of our 50-day challenge, so if you want to learn more about that, check out our intro video. On our last episode, we framed and raised the walls of our tiny house, and in this episode, we're going to be attaching plywood sheathing to those walls to give them shear strength. One of my favorite parts of the building code has to do with wall bracing. Wall bracing calculations in the IRC are tedious and detailed and take up many pages of the code with numerous tables and exceptions to the rules and on and on. For some reason, I love it. One of my crowning achievements as a novice builder was when a building inspector told me my plans didn't meet wall bracing requirements, and I politely brought him highlighted excerpts from the building code that spelled out exactly how I met the requirements. He relented, saying he hadn't ever seen anyone use the exception to the rule that I was using. It felt great. I could spend multiple videos talking about wall bracing requirements and different ways of meeting them. If enough of our Patreon members request it, I'd be happy to oblige, but for this video, we're just going to keep it simple. The short of it is that wall bracing requirements prevent walls from falling down due to shear forces. Think of a cardboard box with no top and no bottom. It's very easy to flatten it. However, when it has a top and/or a bottom securely attached, it becomes quite difficult. So the top plate and the studs are the sides of the box, and the wall bracing is the top and/or bottom of the box. When the type of wall bracing you use is strong, you only need it on one side of the wall, but sometimes you need to put bracing on both sides, just like a top and a bottom on the box. The bracing will also help to strengthen the attachment of the wall to the subfloor framing because we will run the plywood all the way down to the sill plate of the subfloor framing that we installed back in episode 3. And when we nail it all together, it will lock the two together. Let's take a quick overview of what we hope to accomplish today. We will be first using a level to make sure the walls are plumb, and also measuring the diagonals of each wall to make sure they are square, as opposed to more like a parallelogram that has different diagonal lengths. Once we are sure the wall is plumb and square, we will secure it in that position with a diagonal 2x4 nailed to several studs. This will lock it in nice and square. Next, we will measure the distance between the studs and cut out small pieces of 2x4 lumber to fit in between. This is called blocking and will allow us to fasten the plywood to the wall on all four sides of each sheet. Next, we will apply some caulk to the studs and blocking to air seal the plywood to the framing. Last, we will position the plywood on the outside of the wall so it's lined up with the studs and the blocking, and nail it down with 8D nails every 6 inches around the outside and every 12 inches along studs in the middle of the sheets. A big part of building a good house is consistently checking for straight, level, square, and plumb every step of the way. Not only will the house look better, but more importantly, you'll make your life a lot easier as you get towards the end of the build. The more crooked your framing is, the harder the sheathing and drywall is going to be attached straight, and the longer it'll take to adjust your doors and windows. This becomes especially important with two-story houses, because if the first story is not straight, then the floor of the second will not be level. It's definitely worth it in the long run to make sure everything you build is straight, level, plumb, and square. For our tiny house, we just used a torpedo level to check for plumb, but keep in mind that with that size level, you need to check for plumb in multiple places because the stud might have a bend to it. We used our diagonal bracing to nudge the walls left or right a bit until the level let us know they were plumb. Once you're sure the walls are plumb, it's still a good idea to measure the diagonals. We nailed another 2x4 diagonally across the studs on the inside of the wall to lock it in place in this position. Hey guys, I spend my time and money making these videos for you because I want to give you the confidence and knowledge for you to build your own tiny house. In return, I'd really appreciate it if you could pause this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and visit our Patreon page. Your support ensures that you'll see more awesome videos like this one. If you do start building your own tiny house, you can use the links in the description below to purchase your tools and supplies, and that also helps out the channel. With the wall straight and plumb and locked into place with the diagonal bracing, we were ready to install some blocking. The blocking creates a place to nail the plywood sheathing to the wall. We measured up 4 feet from the middle of the sill plate of the subfloor framing and made a mark on the outer stud on either end of the wall. Then we used a chalk line to snap a line between the two so there was a mark on every stud at the proper height. We nailed the blocking between the studs so the center of the face of the blocking was right at this mark. To measure the size of each piece of blocking, you want to measure between the studs at the bottom of the wall, and this will lock the stud into a straight position. If you measure from the middle of the wall and the stud has a slight bend to it, your blocking will lock that bend into the stud forever. You don't want to do this. I used 16D nails through the stud and into the blocking on one side and toenails on the other side of each piece of blocking. Once the blocking's all attached, we ran a bead of caulk all around the studs and blocking where the edges of the first sheet of plywood will go. I designed the tiny house to be a multiple of 4 feet long and wide, so it'd be easy to install the sheathing and minimize waste. This meant I didn't have to cut the first sheet of plywood at all. The end of it aligns perfectly with the middle of a stud, and the top of it will line up with the center of our blocking. We stuck a couple of 16D nails into the middle of the bottom plate to hold the sheet in place while we fine-tuned its positioning. Then I used 8D nails to attach it to the studs and blocking. It's important to nail the sheet down every 6 inches so it gets pressed into the caulk and forms a nice tight air seal with the framing. So for the air sealing, it's very important that the plywood sheathing that we're going to be installing extends all the way down here. And it's going to be sealed tight right here. We want a nice solid air sealing. If you remember, we air sealed between this plate and our foam. So we've got a nice tight air seal from this piece all across the bottom. We want that same air seal to run up the sides. So we're gonna run our sheathing all the way down to here and then caulk it to this bottom plate right here. So that'll extend our air sealing up through the side because wood is air impermeable. It's also important to nail it every 12 inches on the studs that lie in the middle of the sheet because this is part of the wall bracing requirement, and ensure the studs are locked into position plumb and square. Every time we install another sheet of plywood, we spaced it from the previous sheet with 16D nails. Wood will constantly expand and contract as it gets moist and dries, so you want to provide some space for this movement. For several of the sheets, I had to cut out for the fenders and for plumbing inlets and outlets, etc. So this is our last chance before we put the tape on to pop out any nails. So you can see this one right here, just where I had missed the stud. Here's another one. So you can see how I forgot that there was no blocking here. Here's the blocking. Oh, this is a door, or sorry, a window, so there's no blocking. So sometimes when you're nailing, you'll forget where you have a window opening, where you have header hangers, because nails don't like to go into those. So you'll make mistakes, and before we tape our seams in our sheathing, we have one last chance to bang out any nails. Once the tape's on the other side, you're going to bang it into the tape and puncture a hole in the tape, and that's bad because the tape is part of our air control layer. The middle of this sheet did not even get nailed right here. Luckily, it's not a sheet break, so even though there's caulk here, it's not an air sealing part because the sheet goes all the way through it. But for shear, for wall bracing, it does need to get nailed right here. So that's another thing we want to take care of before we tape. So we talked about how the air barrier needs to wrap underneath, and we talked about how we caulk the sheathing to tie it in the bottom. Well, we also need to caulk all the seams in between the panels, and that will make just a full sheet of air barrier. And this is really good air barrier tape here. Looking back, want to go over the mistakes that happened when we were sheeting the walls. I was short a few bottles of caulk, so we had to go back and get more caulk, kind of stop the day. And you know, it's happened several times already in the build. So, and I'm trying to be really organized and make sure I have all the materials there. But sometimes you can underestimate how much of something you're going to go through. You know, sometimes I'll do a quick Google search like, oh, how many bottles of caulk can get on a sheet of plywood? But then when you actually do it, it uses a little more. So I can tend to be more of like very efficient and not want to waste things. And so I tend to order not enough. And it really is better if you just order a little bit extra. And most like Home Depot or contractor stores, they have really good return policies. Just keep your receipts all together. They'll take it back. So it is kind of a pain, but when you're going to the hardware store often anyway, it's a good idea to just get extra and return it rather than run out of something and have to stop what you're doing and go get it. I was originally going to install the interior walls and bump outs next, but due to the massive amounts of rain we've been getting, I'm going to skip those and move on to the roof. I hope you can all join me in our next episode as I install the roof framing.